When you picture an ancient execution, there is a specific expectation of, well, total chaos.
Right, you think of just absolute mayhem.
Yeah, you imagine a struggling prisoner, shouting guards, dust kicking up in the air, a situation that has completely spiraled out of the condemned person's control.
You picture desperation.
Precisely. You picture someone cornered by the state, fighting for their last breath, while the machinery of an empire just crushes them indiscriminately. But welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are bringing you a brand new deep dive. We are taking a magnifying glass to the historical, linguistic, and dogmatic details found in the Gospel of Matthew, specifically chapter 27, verses 33 through 37.
And our mission for this session is to look at the crucifixion of Jesus Christ through the lens of a pair of rigorous expository and systematic theological treatises.
Right, and these sources, they present a very different picture from that chaotic scene we usually imagine.
They really do. They argue that the cross was not an out-of-control tragedy.
Or like a political conspiracy that just got out of hand.
No, not at all. Instead, we are looking at the precise execution of a divine decree planned before the foundation of the world.
It is so easy to gloss over the familiar details, You have probably seen the paintings.
Sure, everyone has.
And you might have heard the basic outline of the story since you were a child. But we are going to slow down time today for you.
We are going to look at the precise Greek syntax to reveal how Christ was actively executing his priestly office, even while physically pinned down by Roman executioners.
Which is just an incredible thought. But we have to start at the physical coordinates, the geography of humiliation. Golgotha.
Yes, the text establishes the location with surgical precision. It states they arrived at a place called Golgotha, which is called place of a skull.
And that word Golgotha, that's not Greek, right?
Right. The proper noun Golgotha is an Aramaic transliteration, Golgotha, which quite literally translates to a skull. The Greek text provides a direct translation for its original readers, which is craniotopos.
Okay, so craniotopos, the place of a skull.
It's exactly, well, spot on. Historians debate the visual reality of this location, though. Some suggest the topography of the hill itself resembled the dome of a human cranium.
Like it actually looked like a skull from a distance.
Yeah, maybe. Others point to the grim reality that it was a recognized site of public executions, a place associated with the unburied remains of the condemned.
Wow, so just a horrific scene either way.
Totally. And the geographical placement was highly strategic for the Roman Empire. It was located outside the northwestern walls of Jerusalem, situated directly adjacent to a busy public highway.
Which feels super intentional.
Oh, it was. The Romans utilized a specific legal category of execution called supplicium servile.
Supplicium servile. I want to pause on that phrase. That implies it was not a generic punishment handed out to just any criminal, right? It sounds highly selective.
It was reserved strictly for the lowest strata of society. Slaves, disgraced soldiers, and political insurgents.
So regular citizens were safe from this.
Yes. Roman citizens were legally exempt from crucifixion, save for the most extreme cases of high treason. The empire wielded the cross as a tool of state terror.
It was not just about ending a human life.
No, it was about the total annihilation of a person's dignity. It was the most brutal, torturous, and shameful method of execution known to the ancient world.
Try to visualize the psychological impact of that location for a second. The Roman cross was essentially a grotesque public billboard meant to communicate total domination.
That is a great way to put it.
You put it right on a busy highway, so every merchant, every traveler, every pilgrim walking into the holy city of Jerusalem sees it. You are walking to the temple to worship, and you have to pass this brutal spectacle.
The message is undeniable. Look what happens when you cross Rome.
Right. But here is where we need to connect the historical reality with the theological argument of our source material. If the Romans were just carrying out standard administrative terror, setting up their terrifying billboard on the highway outside the walls, how does the text prove God is the one actually orchestrating the location?
That is the big question.
Because a skeptic looking at this historical record would point out that the Romans always crucified people outside city walls for sanitary and administrative reasons. They would say this geographical location is just a coincidence of Roman legal policy.
And, that perspective makes sense until you factor in the massive theological weight of Old Testament covenantal typology.
Okay, walk us through that.
The Romans placed these crosses outside the city walls to physically and symbolically exclude the condemned from civil society. They were declaring the individual cursed, stripped of all civic rights and banished from the realm of the living.
Basically erasing them from the community.
Exactly. But under the Old Covenant framework, specifically the book of Leviticus chapter 16, this location outside the camp carries a specific, unavoidable meaning.
Leviticus 16, that's the Day of Atonement, right?
Yes. It details the ceremonies for the Day of Atonement. According to the Levitical law, the carcasses of the animals sacrificed for the sin, offering the animals whose blood was brought into the holy sanctuary by the high priest to make atonement for the people. Well, those physical bodies could not remain inside the camp.
Wait, they couldn't just burn them on the main altar?
No, they had to be carried outside the camp to be completely consumed by fire.
Oh, wow. That requirement was about the total expulsion of defilement. The sin of the nation was symbolically transferred to the animal, making it ritually unclean.
Right, it had to be removed from the holy community where God dwelled.
So by executing Christ outside the gates of Jerusalem, the Roman administrative machine unwittingly fulfilled the rigid requirement for the ultimate sin offering.
Rome thought it was disposing of a political nuisance. In reality, the sovereign hand of God used Roman crucifixion protocols to place the true substitute outside the camp.
That is incredible. The Savior was treated as an outcast, bearing the curse of covenantal excommunication.
Yes, taking the defilement of his people outside the holy city to suffer the wrath of divine justice.
So the Romans think they are building a billboard of state terror, but they are actually building an altar. Every detail, right down to the GPS coordinates of the execution, is governed by a divine mandate.
Nothing is out of control.
And that sheer brutality, the dust of the highway, the noise of the passing crowds, the absolute shame of the location, all of that leads directly into a very strange interaction between the executioners and the Savior. Our source material points to the offering of the bitter cup.
Right. Verse 34 describes this interaction. It says, they gave him wine to drink mingled with gall.
Which sounds so bizarre at first glance.
To comprehend the mechanics of this moment, we really have to look at the historical background of first-century execution practices. There was an established Jewish custom in Jerusalem based on a literal interpretation of Proverbs 31.6.
What does that proverb say?
It instructs the reader to give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish. Based on this proverb, groups of charitable women in Jerusalem would prepare a specific mixture to give to condemned men on their way to the execution site.
Okay, so this was like an organized effort. They would bring this mixture out to the highway to give these men a small sliver of relief.
Yes, they mixed sour wine or vinegar with a heavy narcotic substance, typically myrrh or gall. The goal was to dull the sensory systems of the men being crucified.
So it functioned as a potent sedative.
Precisely. In an environment defined by merciless, drawn-out torture, this narcotic drink was a rare act of human charity.
But the Romans did not hand this drink to Jesus with a gentle spirit. They took this local charity and, well, they weaponized it.
The execution squad presented this mixture to Jesus as a cruel, bitter insult. They were mocking his claims to royalty. They treated the drink as a sarcastic royal toast to a defeated king.
Just piling on the humiliation.
And the Greek word chosen by Matthew to describe this substance is chole. This term refers to bile, venom, or any extremely bitter, toxic, or narcotic substance.
And the author of the treatise points out that Matthew's specific word choice here is highly theological, right?
It is. Because Mark's gospel also records this event, but Mark describes it as wine mingled with myrrh. Matthew deliberately uses the word chole.
Why the difference?
Matthew uses chole to establish a direct, undeniable verbal connection with the Greek Septuagint translation of Psalm 69.21. The specific Greek word is used in that ancient prophetic text.
Remind me how that song goes.
It reads, "They gave me also gall for my meat, and in my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink."
Oh, wow. So this textual link demonstrates that the specific chemical composition of the drink offered on that highway was preordained centuries before the Romans even invented crucifixion.
The prophetic fulfillment is staggering. But the author of the treatise spends the most time analyzing Jesus' response to this drink.
Yeah, the Greek syntax in the second half of verse 34 is incredibly specific, and we really need to break that syntax down.
The text states, "And having tasted it, he was not willing to drink." The phrase "having tasted" translates the Greek word eusemenos.
Eusemenos, okay.
Yes, this is an aorist middle participle. We need to look closely at what that grammatical structure signifies.
Because it proves that Christ did not reject the cup blindly.
Exactly. He did not bat it away out of reflex or instinct. The middle voice implies a deliberate, personal participation in the action. He engaged in a deliberate sensory evaluation of the liquid.
He analyzed its properties.
Yes, he recognized the narcotic nature of the gall.
He knew specifically what it was. He knew it was a painkiller.
And, knowing its chemical properties, we encounter the final clause of the verse ukothalin paean. He was not willing to drink.
Ukohulinpian.
The verb utlenin is placed in the imperfect tense. The imperfect tense in Greek denotes a continuous, fixed, ongoing state of action in the past.
So he did not simply turn his head away once and then reconsider.
No, he established a fixed state of his will. He resolutely and continuously refused the narcotic.
I have to push back here for a second, though. Look at the historical context of the Greco-Roman world. This was a culture that idolized Stoic philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
They venerated men who could endure physical torture without showing weakness. A skeptic could easily argue that this refusal was just an ancient display of Stoic pride.
Like a macho refusal to show pain.
Right. Jesus knows. He is being watched by Roman soldiers who respect toughness. So he refuses their medicine to prove he is stronger than their torture. Why should we read massive theological significance into a man refusing a painkiller?
Well, evaluating the text through the lens of Roman Stoicism misses the covenantal framework entirely. The refusal was not driven by human pride or a desire to display masculine toughness.
What was driving it then?
It was driven by the strict priestly requirements for securing substitutionary atonement. To grasp this, we have to contrast this physical cup of gall with the invisible spiritual cup as divine fury.
Oh, the cup of wrath.
Yes. Throughout the prophetic literature of the Old Testament, the cup is a consistent metaphor for the judicial, unadulterated wrath of God against human rebellion.
Like in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed in agony for the specific spiritual cup to pass from him, if it were possible.
So he is standing on Golgotha with two cups in front of him. The physical cup of gall offered by the Roman soldiers and the spiritual cup of wrath offered by the Father.
That is a stark image.
He refused the physical painkiller because he had to remain fully conscious to drink the spiritual cup of God's wrath clear-mindedly. Our great high priest had to remain entirely alert during the cosmic day of atonement.
Because the theology of substitution requires active, conscious obedience.
Precisely. If the substitute had been sedated, if his sensory systems had been dulled by the narcotic chole, the active endurance of the penal sanction of the law would have been compromised.
So he was not just a passive victim bleeding out on a piece of wood.
Not at all. He was actively offering himself as a spotless sacrifice to satisfy divine justice. The legal substitution required him to suffer the full penalty of the broken law in both his body and his human soul, with absolute clarity of mind.
If we think about the nature of a substitute, this makes perfect sense. If you owe a massive debt and someone steps in to pay it, they have to legally and consciously sign the transfer.
Right. They cannot be unconscious or drugged when they take on your liability.
Christ, as the perfect federal head of his people, walked into the furnace of execution with his faculties completely alert. The world always offers alternative paths of escape, numbing compromises to avoid facing the reality of sin.
The narcotic was an offer to escape the full terror of the cross.
But he deliberately rejected the escape. He chose the unmitigated experience of divine wrath so the atonement would be complete.
A fully conscious sacrifice.
Having established that clear-minded, conscious state, the narrative moves to the next administrative step the soldiers took. And this step, while it looks like a mundane bureaucratic action, carries immense dogmatic weight. Let's look at the division of his garments.
Verse 35 reads, "And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots." The execution squad was known as a quaternio.
A quaternio, so a specific unit.
Yes, this was a designated unit of 4 soldiers, typically commanded by a centurion. Under Roman provincial law, these soldiers possessed specific rights regarding the execution.
Right, they were granted the legal right of spolia or bona vacantia.
This legal principle permitted the executioners to claim the minor personal effects and clothing of the condemned criminal. It functioned as a grim form of compensation for carrying out the brutal task.
Just picking over his belongings.
They stripped Jesus completely naked, leaving him entirely exposed to the elements in the public gaze. It is the ultimate form of social exposure and degradation.
But Matthew handles the description of this event with a very unusual grammatical structure. I'm looking at verse 35, and it seems like Matthew completely buries the lead.
He really does.
The actual horrific mechanics of driving nails through human flesh are treated as a secondary, almost passing detail, while the main focus is, the soldiers dividing up his clothes.
The author of the treatise highlights this stunning grammatical feature. Matthew subordinates the actual physical act of the crucifixion. He uses the aorist participle starisantes, which translates to having crucified.
Having crucified. He turns the central event of the Christian faith into a temporal modifier.
Exactly. The main governing verb of the entire sentence is dimirizanto, they divided. Grammatically, the focus is not on the nails. The focus is on the division of the garments.
Why would Matthew structure the sentence that way? Why draw our attention away from the physical agony and point it toward a group of soldiers rolling dice for a tunic?
By subordinating the physical mechanics of the execution, the text directs our attention to the symbolic, prophetic, and theological meaning of his suffering. The casting of lots is a direct fulfillment of Psalm 22.18 and also Psalm 21.1 Kaline in the Greek Septuagint.
So the soldiers thought they were just playing a game of chance to secure a piece of woven cloth.
They were acting entirely out of their own free will and greed.
Yeah.
Yet in their mundane gambling, they were executing the sovereign decree of God down to the smallest detail.
Which leads directly into the theological implications of this moment. The treatise unpacks the doctrine of double imputation, often referred to as the Great Exchange. Let's lay out the mechanics of double imputation.
It's a massive concept.
I like to think of this doctrine as a radical, impossible financial transaction. Imagine you have incurred billions of dollars in criminal debt. You are facing absolute ruin, bankruptcy, and a lifetime in a maximum security prison. You have zero assets.
A totally hopeless situation.
Then someone steps into the courtroom. They legally absorb every single cent of your criminal debt. They take on your bankruptcies, your penalties, and your prison sentence. They become legally liable for your ruin.
But the transaction does not stop there.
No. While they are absorbing your infinite debt, they are simultaneously transferring infinite, untouchable wealth into your completely empty account. You go from absolute criminal poverty to infinite riches in one stroke, and they are dragged away to pay for your crimes.
That analogy captures the judicial reality of the cross perfectly. Double imputation involves two simultaneous credits. The guilt of human rebellion is imputed or credited to Christ.
He absorbs the liability.
Simultaneously, his perfect, lifelong obedience to the law of God, his righteousness is imputed to the believer. The physical stripping of Christ's garments on Golgotha illustrates this spiritual reality in real time.
How so?
We have to trace the biblical theology of nakedness all the way back to Genesis 3.7.
The Garden of Eden. Following the rebellion, the immediate consequence for Adam and Eve was the realization of their nakedness.
They experienced shame, guilt, and the terror of exposure to divine judgment.
They frantically tried to cover themselves with fig leaves.
Their physical exposure was a manifestation of their sudden spiritual exposure before a holy God. Here on the cross, we see the second Adam, Jesus Christ, hanging naked before a fallen world.
He is actively bearing the spiritual nakedness, the guilt, and the shame of his elect.
He suffers the ultimate physical and social exposure so that his people can be clothed. He was stripped bare so that those who trust in him would be draped in the white robes of his perfect righteousness.
So the soldiers dividing his earthly garments point to the reality that he has relinquished everything to secure the eternal covering for his people.
It's all connected.
The cosmic transaction of double imputation is happening right there in the dust. The wrath of God is being absorbed. Infinite righteousness is being transferred to the accounts of guilty sinners. The prophecies written 1,000 years earlier are snapping into place with absolute precision.
And right below his feet, the reaction of the soldiers is chillingly mundane.
Which brings us to the apathetic watch in verse 36. The text states simply, "And sitting down, they kept watch over him there."
Right.
I cannot get past the phrase sitting down. There is something terrifying about how casual that action is.
The Greek verb used for kept watch is atron. This verb is in the imperfect active indicative.
The imperfect tense again, like with the refusal of the gall.
Yes, we discussed that earlier. It denotes a continuous, prolonged action in past time. Matthew uses this specific tense to act like a slow-motion camera.
So it is not a quick glance to make sure the prisoner is secure.
The grammar literally traps the soldiers in a state of prolonged, passive staring. It stands in sharp contrast to the rapid, decisive actions of stripping his clothes or driving the nails.
The syntax represents a state of passive, ongoing surveillance.
They sit down in the dirt and they watch the hours tick by.
The treatise calls this grammatical choice an index of the agonizing passage of time. It highlights the total isolation of the king. He is suspended between heaven and earth, suffocating under the weight of divine justice, while the executioners just stare at him.
Probably bored. waiting for their shift to end.
It highlights the isolation, but it also demonstrates a terrifying theological reality, the absolute spiritual blindness of the natural man. Think about the physical proximity here. You might be asking yourself, how is it humanly possible to be that close to a world-altering event and feel absolutely nothing?
It boggles the mind.
These 4 soldiers are inches away from the blood of the new covenant. They're physically watching the creator of the universe secure eternal salvation. They hear the words he speaks, they see the sky turn dark.
And they view the entire event as a bureaucratic shift they need to finish so they can go back to the barracks.
It is like someone mindlessly filling out paperwork while sitting on the edge of an erupting volcano. They are completely oblivious to the heat, the smoke, and the magma. They're just checking boxes on their forms while the world splits open behind them.
That is a great picture of it. The theological explanation for that apathy is found in the doctrine of total depravity.
Walk us through that connection.
Apart from the regenerating work of the Holy Spirit, the human mind and heart remain entirely blind to the glory of the cross. Mankind in its natural state cannot perceive the things of the Spirit of God.
The soldiers were physically present at the epicenter of redemptive history, but they were spiritually dead.
The source material views this indifferent watch as a solemn warning. You can sit under the clearest teaching of the gospel, you can possess all the historical facts, you can be in the very presence of the truth, and if your heart has not been regenerated, you will remain completely untouched by it.
From the blind sentinels sitting in the dirt, the text forces us to look up. It shifts our focus to the object placed right above their line of sight, the final legal decree. Verse 37 details the immutable title.
The verse reads, "And they placed above his head his written charge. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews."
The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, ordered this inscription to be written, right?
Yes, and the technical Roman term for this placard is the titulus. The Greek text uses the verb epithekon, meaning they placed it or fixed it.
Epithekon.
This is an aorist active indicative verb, marking a decisive, completed legal act by the authorities. Furthermore, the word translated as charge is Asian.
Asian, so this is not a casual descriptor.
No, Asian refers to the formal written legal ground of an indictment.
So this abort was not just a handwritten note nailed up to make fun of him.
Yeah.
This was the official Roman legal document justifying his execution to the public.
Exactly. The author of our source material draws attention to the use of a perfect passive participle, here gegramenein, which translates to having been written.
The perfect tense in Greek indicates a past action that produces continuing, permanent results, right?
Spot on. This grammatical choice demonstrates that the titulus was an unalterable legal monument. It was fixed, it was permanent, and it carries massive dispensational and covenantal implications.
Walk us through those implications for a second. How does a Roman legal document affect covenant theology?
Israel, acting as a national entity through its religious leadership, officially rejected their promised Davidic king. They handed him over to the Gentile power of Rome.
So there's a judicial consequence to that.
Yes, as a direct judicial consequence of that national rejection, Jesus is executed under his true Davidic title. The ethnic nation of Israel is temporarily set aside in the divine timeline, while Christ simultaneously establishes his sovereign reign over a global, Gentile-grafted spiritual body.
And the title remains pinned above his head as a permanent historical testimony.
It declares that his substitutionary death is the very mechanism by which he establishes his eternal kingdom.
I have to ask about Pilate's actual motive here, though. When you read the historical accounts, the Jewish religious leaders hated this sign.
Oh, they despised it.
They went back to Pilate and demanded he change the wording. They wanted it to say, "He said, I am king of the Jews." And Pilate flatly refused to change a single letter. Was Pilate intentionally trying to infuriate the Jewish leadership, or was he just mocking Jesus?
Well, Pilate was a ruthless pragmatist. He was likely using the sign as a final, bitter insult directed at the Jewish leadership. They had successfully backed him into a political corner, virtually forcing him to authorize the execution to prevent a massive riot during the Passover festival.
So he felt manipulated.
He resented being manipulated. He was mocking their nationalistic hopes. He was essentially telling them, here is your glorious prophesied king beaten, naked, and dying on Roman wood. This is what happens to your kings.
He wrote the sign out of pure political spite.
He acted out of spite and political calculation, but the source material highlights that God's sovereign hand directed the pen.
God used Pilate's anger.
Under divine providence, Pilate's sarcastic insult was forced to declare the absolute, objective truth. It is an ironic, immutable declaration of his true messianic office. Pilate thought he was writing a joke, but he was drafting the eternal decree of the king.
We have spent a lot of time analyzing the historical scene on Golgotha. We have unpacked the geography, the bitter cup, the divided garments, the blind guards, and the permanent title.
It is a lot of ground to cover.
But the author of our source material takes this rigorous historical and grammatical analysis and applies it aggressively to modern ideologies.
The transition in the treatise from first-century Roman execution protocols to 21st century church trends and sociological debates is extremely sharp.
It is severe and unrelenting. Let's look at the theological applications the author makes first. The text takes direct aim at the prosperity gospel.
The argument against the prosperity gospel is derived directly from the physical realities of the cross.
Because the prosperity gospel suggests that genuine wealth guarantees earthly wealth, physical health, and a life of ease.
Right. But the historical record of Golgotha displays the Lord of Glory deliberately rejecting physical ease. He refuses the narcotic. He is stripped of his last earthly possession, his tunic. He hangs in absolute physical poverty and agony.
It annihilates the idea that following Christ is a pathway to luxury. The author argues that the text calls believers to embrace the reality of suffering, to recognize that the servant is not greater than the master.
A theology centered on material comfort cannot survive a prolonged look at the absolute destitution of the cross.
The author then targets pragmatism and seeker-sensitive church models. These movements operate on the premise that the church must make the message more palatable, more comfortable, and less offensive to modern culture in order to attract people.
The treatise calls this offering a drugged gospel.
A drugged gospel. That analogy is drawn directly from the bitter cup of gall offered by the soldiers, right?
Yes. Just as the Romans offered a narcotic to numb the excruciating pain of the execution, seeker-sensitive churches offer a painless therapeutic message that deliberately avoids the harsh realities of human depravity, the strict demands of the law, and the terrifying reality of divine justice.
They want to offer the psychological benefits of the cross without the bloody offense of the cross.
The treatise argues that altering the message to avoid offending the culture is a bitter compromise. A drugged gospel cannot save anyone.
The author demands a return to the uncompromised, offensive proclamation of substitutionary atonement, insisting that the true gospel requires the sinner to face the unmitigated reality of their guilt before a holy God.
The third theological application refutes modern mysticism.
Okay, let's unpack that.
This point relies heavily on our analysis of the permanent legal title placed above Christ's head, the titulus. The author argues that true, saving faith rests entirely on the objective, historical, written record.
It is anchored to the perfect passive participle we discussed earlier.
Yes, the gegrameny, the unalterable legal monument of what Christ accomplished in history.
This means faith is not based on chasing subjective internal feelings. It is not about seeking private revelations or emotional highs. It is anchored to the concrete historical fact of the substitutionary death, which is documented in the written word.
The author is urging believers to look outside themselves. The constant temptation of mysticism is to look inward for spiritual validation.
But the treatise argues that looking inward only reveals the corruption of the human heart. True assurance is found by looking outward, to the objective reality of the titulus and the finished work of the cross. Now we need to examine the political and social applications made in the source material. The author of our source material argues that the theology of the cross completely refutes certain modern social frameworks. The treatise claims that secular systems dividing humanity into oppressor and victim matrices are bankrupt.
The treatise specifically names critical race theory and Marxism as examples of these bankrupt frameworks.
The author's claim is that these secular philosophies view the world purely through horizontal sociological power struggles. They attempt to diagnose the human condition by looking at how different groups interact with each other, who holds authority, and who is marginalized. And I want to be clear here, we're not taking sides, but simply outlining the author's claim that these systems fail to address the core issue.
Yes, we are not taking sides, but simply outlining the author's claim that the argument presented in the text identifies the ultimate human problem, not as horizontal political oppression, but as vertical spiritual hostility against God. The root of all human misery, according to the author, is the rebellion of the creature against the Creator.
So, according to the source, the solution offered at Golgotha is penal substitutionary atonement. This atonement reconciles guilty sinners to a holy God, solving the vertical problem. And the author argues that only when the vertical hostility is resolved can true, horizontal unity between different groups of people be achieved. The author claims this theological reality rejects the Marxist framework of perpetual class struggle in favor of a cosmic reconciliation achieved solely through the blood of Christ.
The author moves directly from the grammatical analysis of Greek aorist participles into confronting 21st century sociological theories, insisting that the cross is the only legitimate lens through which to view human relations.
It is a massive leap to go from a Roman cross to a university sociology department. The author views the text not as a dead historical document, but as a living framework that sits in judgment over every modern philosophy. How does the author justify bridging that massive gap?
The bridge connecting the 1st century to the 21st century is the doctrine of total depravity. The author views the Roman soldiers casting lots, the cynical pragmatism of Pilate, and the mocking crowds not as historical anomalies, but as the representative behavior of all fallen humanity.
Human nature has not evolved.
Exactly.
Right.
Therefore, the philosophies produced by fallen humanity today suffer from the exact same spiritual blindness seen in the guards sitting apathetically at the foot of the cross. The cure for the 1st century Roman guard is the same cure for the modern secularist, the objective, substitutionary work of Christ.
That brings all these massive concepts right back down to our perspective. It forces you to evaluate where you stand in relation to that specific historical event. You cannot remain neutral. Let's synthesize everything we have covered today.
We have analyzed the sovereign intentionality running through every detail of the crucifixion. We saw his clear-minded refusal of the narcotic cup, proving his active obedience in bearing the full weight of divine justice without seeking escape.
We observed the sovereign division of his garments, which fulfilled ancient prophecy while vividly demonstrating the great exchange of double imputation.
He took our nakedness and shame to secure our righteous covering.
We looked at the chilling apathy of the guards sitting in the dirt, which points out the terrifying reality of human spiritual blindness. And we unpacked the permanent, unalterable legal title placed above his head by a cynical politician, which stands as an immutable declaration of his kingship over a global body of believers.
All of these elements, from the Aramaic name of the hill to the Greek tense of the verbs, synthesized to prove one undeniable point. Christ was entirely in control of his own sacrifice.
He was not a helpless victim swept up in the administrative machinery of Rome. He was the sovereign mediator fulfilling the eternal decree of the Father.
A completely sovereign act.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we just discussed. We spent a lot of time analyzing that wooden board pilot nailed above the cross.
The titulus.
The titulus. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews, written in out of political spite, guarded by spiritually blind soldiers, hanging over a man who was stripped naked, bleeding, and suffocating. It was a picture of absolute, unmitigated humiliation. The world looked at that sign and saw the ultimate defeat.
Absolute ruin.
Now contrast that rough wooden board with the promise found in the book of Revelation, chapter 19, verse 16. The source material touches on this contrast right at the end. Imagine the psychological whiplash. Think about those soldiers who rolled dice for his clothes, or Pilate who wrote the sign, or anyone who mocked him on that highway.
The tables turned completely.
Imagine seeing the man who hung crushed under that wooden sign suddenly returning. The sky splits open. He is riding on a white war horse. His eyes are described as a flame of fire, and the title that was once mockingly scrawled on a piece of Roman wood is now blazing across his thigh in letters of absolute light, King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
It is the final transition from sovereign humiliation to sovereign exaltation.
What looks like absolute chaos and defeat to the natural mind is actually the precise mechanism of eternal victory. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It has been a rigorous and necessary study of the text.
Until next time, keep your eyes on the text. Take care.